Hello, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Patricia Coral, and I'm the Director of Events here at Politics and Prose. We now host in person, we're back to hosting in person events, and we're hosting virtual events along with partner events, trips, and classes. If you would like for a full list of everything confirmed, you can go to our website and all the information is there. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. As the mask mandate is back in place, we ask you to wear a mask throughout the event, and we can provide one for you if you need it. When we get to the time for opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a standing microphone here. Please line up at the mic so that everyone can hear your questions, as we want that questions to be heard in our recording of the event. We are both audio and video recording. We are going to be live streaming today's program, so eventually you can look for today's video in our YouTube channel. Following the Q&A, we'll have a signing up here at this table, so if you have not already purchased the book, we have plenty of copies behind our registers in the back. We will ask you to line up starting here at the pillar. We will come to ask your name for personalization, so please have your books ready for us. Once the event is complete, we ask you that you fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy, if you can, to help us a little bit. So now, without further ado, tonight I'm very excited to welcome Jacinda Townsend, celebrating the release of Mother Country. Jacinda, we're very excited about this one. Jacinda Townsend is the author of Saint Monkey, which won the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize and the James Fenimore Cooper Prize. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and teaches in the MFA program at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Townsend will be joining conversation with Melissa Scholes Young, a beloved DC, well, Midwest DC writer, my professor and one of my mentors, so I'm particularly excited about tonight with these two authors here. Melissa Scholes Young is the author of the novels The Hive and Flood, and editor of Grace in Darkness and Furious Gravity, two anthologies by women writers. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Ms., Washington Post, Poets and Writers, Ploughshares, Literary Hub, and Believer magazine. She has been the recipient of fellowships from the Bread Loaf Bakeless Camargo Foundation, the Center for Mark Twain Studies, and the Virginia Centers for Creative Arts. Born and raised in Hannibal, Missouri, she is a professor in literature at American University. Please, let's welcome them. Thank you.
Oh, here we go. We're on. We're on. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for coming, you guys. I'm so glad to see everybody. Yes. Melissa and I haven't seen each other for what, more than 10 years.
So I want to talk about that.
I think yours is not.
Mine's not on.
Hey. Now you can hear me? Oh, I'm so corrupt in a microphone. Are you kidding? Like, I feel like I should sing or dance or something interesting. We have not, but that's actually what I want to talk about first. Mm-hmm. We met more than a decade ago, and we had little babies, and now you've written this amazing book, Mother Country, about motherhood. In fact, when I was in your workshop, I was nursing a baby and you were bringing a baby, and we somehow figured all of that out. Right. survived, I would say even thrived. We've got a few books.
Yes.
Will you talk a bit about deciding to write about motherhood?
Yeah, and I think you may have felt this too, right? It's like people will advise you against writing about motherhood because then you get put in this little motherhood ghetto of writers writing about motherhood, right?
How dare you?
Right. But it's such rich material, and I'm kind of glad to see. I've seen more male writers writing about fatherhood. My colleague Peter Ho Davies actually has a book out called "The Lie," a lie someone told you about yourself. That's all about fatherhood. But I one of the reasons that and the cover actually was my idea. So this isn't too much of a spoiler that weed is a huge part of the plot. Weed is kind of like the plot.
Well, Shannon trying to find the weed
Right,
is a plot
the
device.
Exactly.
Right.
But I thought, we have this whole like trope of the saintly mother and the trope of what mothers are supposed to do and think and be like. And I don't know any mothers like that, right?
They don't get books written, that's
exactly.
for sure.
And so I thought, well, one of the things I'm writing about is how motherhood is kind of this gritty reality, and that the way I entered the character of Shannon, and we're going to talk a little bit about her later at length, but when I had kids, before I had kids, I had this idea of like how that was going to happen, and it was going to be in a pool of water, and like Bambi was going to come and talk to me, and everything would be happy, and that's not at all what happened. They were both born via C-section. It took me years to feel like I was their mother, that I deserved to be their mother, because it was like, okay, I failed at the critical moment, and so I just kind of spooled out in my imagination, well, let's take this to the nth degree. If you stole a child, borrowed a child,
Raised, yeah.
how long would it take you to feel like that child's mother? And I think it's a process, and the biology is never determinate. It's all those moments after you become a parent, and those moments are hard and they're real. And so I was like, yes, of course she's smoking a cigarette. I don't. They put a cigarette. It's weed. So, yeah.
So you feel like anything Shannon has to do to get through this moment, or any of the moments of motherhood, that what I'm hearing you say also is the difference between expectation and reality. And that's maybe probably why I admired you so much as a professor and love your work so much, is that entering an MFA program in my mid-30s, I was supposed to put the kids away, and suddenly one of them needed a nurse. And you, as my professor, had kids that suddenly needed childcare. And you know what? Sometimes you had to bring them to class. And we worked through all of those things together. That, to me, is such a realistic portrait of what it's actually like versus these romantic notions of, I'm going to have a nanny that sweeps them away, or full-time, help. So these portraits of motherhood, to me, in all their complicated forms, and these portraits of what it means to be a woman in all these complicated forms, to me, is what resonated so much in St. Monkey, but also in Mother Country. I'm really just here as a fan, but I do have questions. I want to talk first about this idea of what you've lived through, and also how empathy is really a writer's kind of superpower.
Yeah, I love that question, because I think that all artists, whether they be visual artists or actors or dancers, certainly musicians and writers, particularly, like, it's our very job to sort of step outside of our skin and into other people's skins, and then come back into our skin all traumatized and shook, and transmit that experience to the world. And so I've talked a little bit about what's behind Shannon's character. What's behind Saria's character is kind of an unfortunate reality, and that is that when I say there's a lot of slavery in Mauritania right now, 20% of the population of Mauritania is enslaved, and it's brutal, and it's case-based. It's extremely hard to escape, in part because that society is so if you escape, you're not going to have a job. You know, you're not going to have people. So I met a woman. I took a trip to Mauritania in 2013, and I was hosted by anti-slavery activists who introduced me to a woman who had escaped slavery. She had escaped with 8 children.
Yeah.
All of those children had different fathers because her master had leased her out. And when I met her, she had just escaped, and she had a baby. This baby couldn't have been more than like 2 or 3 months old. So I got to hold this baby, who had been the only person in that family born free, you know, and it was like this powerful, powerful feeling of what that had felt like all through history to be, you know, and I was feeling it so vicariously, but it was still a very powerful feeling to be holding this baby that had been born free, you know, and but she was free, but she was also suffering. She was living in a tent on the edge of the capital city. It was like 120 degrees, you know, and I said, what can I do for you? You know, because it seems so overwhelming. And she said, just tell my story. Just tell my story. And so it's like really important to me to have that empathy as you know, as you move through the world as a writer, and you have to be able to understand that, yes, you know, like because I think too, like one kind of complicating thing about slavery in Mauritania is that a lot of people don't understand it as being wrong, including the slaves themselves. And so to be able to sort of step into that skin and understand like what she has finally come to and transmit that, it's so, yeah, I mean, empathy is a part of our jobs, right? It's like,
but that's a lot of responsibility as well,
isn't it? It's like, I mean, I don't know if you develop characters this way, but you kind of look at people and you're like, what is that? What is that? Right? And then you really have to kind of sympathize with their situation, you know?
right? I think I agree. If you can't write them with compassion, I don't write them. And there's plenty of characters I play with that I just can't get.
Not right.
Yeah,
Can you give an example?
Not in my books.
Okay.
But I hear you. Lauren Groff says, I don't just observe people and my family members, I shake out their pockets. Like this idea that everybody around you is sort of fair game for your observation.
Yeah.
And not for your judgment, but for your empathy, for your compassion.
Right.
That if we can't understand how even a character that does really horrible things is also human, then I feel it's a little bit dangerous to go near them on the page.
Yeah. You have to kind of love people in a different way, right? To rate them.
I have to at least root for them. You know, even when they do wrong, because we're all complicated.
Yes.
We're all flawed. It turns out I'm not perfect yet.
Yeah. Yes.
But that's a lot of work, right?
It
is a lot of work. Will you go ahead? No, Jacinda.
I was gonna say, and that was one of the revisions I did on the book, is that I tried really hard not to take sides, you know, because Shannon is a little bit like Lando Calrissian. She has problems of her own, you know, and she did come to me. She was the first character who came to me.
Was she?
You know, and I think she's dealing with some less harrowing issues, but they're heavy existential problems that she's dealing with, you know, and so that was a revision to make this like as clean as possible, and it's a reason that I also introduced the child's voice, because the child ultimately has to make this decision, like, who's my mother?
Right, so. Right. And I don't want to give anything away. I want to talk about that moment also. But will you read to us from Shannon? This is, to me, this is the beginning of Shannon's story and your own empathy toward her when she first sees, and because I am your student, I've chosen the passage, Jacinda. It starts on page 11.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Second paragraph, she walked with neither aim nor direction.
Thank you. What she means is she knows that I'm a scatterbrain. Thank you.
Not at all. Not at all.
This is 11. She walked with...
right here, second paragraph.
Oh, thank you.
I love this moment where Shannon actually sees the child
Yeah.
for the second time, actually, and kind of
Okay.
makes a decision. Here, let me give you
Am I
mine.
nuts?
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
No, it's okay.
Oh, you have a different. Never mind.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. She walked with neither aim nor direction, but soon came across the same little girl in the same pink jacket as the day before. Today her hair rose free of its braids in a bush of curls around her head. Still, she seemed to belong to no one. Shannon bent until she was eye level and carefully used the phrase she had absorbed over the course of 2 Moroccan visits. Assalamu alaikum. The girl clenched her fingers open and shut. A wave. Come with me, Shannon said in English, taking her hand. She could almost hear the fast beating of her own heart, and she had to stop to make herself think, for she recognized the feeling. A cat stalking birds. She didn't want to feel this bald, this rapacious, but the desire she bore was beyond her strength, as though her resistance had been drowned in all the clomid and progesterone she injected into her own veins. She turned warm and drifted temporarily to the side of herself, outside any lingering sense of morality. She'd wanted too much in this long year of not being pregnant. She desired too hard. She was afraid of losing Vlad as she was of being permanently childless, and she was less afraid of losing herself as she was of losing either thing. La glace? She asked the girl. But when the girl grinned and nodded her head yes, grid stepped itself back into the inner chamber of her heart. This was someone else's child, she reminded it, and she held her arm out to the girl in a manner slightly stiffer. This was someone else's child, whom she was just taking for ice cream. The girl clenched her teeth against her lip in a show of delight Shannon had never seen on anyone, anywhere, ever.
So that's when we meet, Shannon's kind of desire and later learn about her own struggles with infertility. And to me, one of the things that this book is so amazing at is that it revels also in tragedy and hope, like juxtaposition of those together. There's infertility, there's trafficking, there's kidnapping, there's slavery, there's abuse. How do you hold in your writing process? It's Jacinda alone in a room that you have fought to get, and how do you sort of hold that brutality with beauty at the same time?
That's a good question. I think I may have told you guys this story so long ago. There's this true story about this bride who had a cake, and the cake was 7 feet tall, and she got on a ladder to cut it, and it just fell over. Because it turns out you have to have a certain amount of oxygen in a cake, and like a cake that high just can't possibly have it. I know somebody in here, I know there are several scientists in here who know better than I do why. But I think of the novel that way, that, it has to have some beauty along with all that struggle and all that hardship and all that brutality. And so I tried to inject a lot of humor. I think Shannon especially, she, right from the start, she's marrying somebody for like dental insurance, right? So she's right from the start kind of, she has a funny take on the world. With Saria, it was a little bit harder because her life is so hard. But she's, one really challenging, probably the most challenging part of writing the book is that Saria is illiterate, and she's illiterate in every language, which means her way of looking at the world is just so different from what we know. It's like the moon comes up for her, and it just kind of comes up and it just disappears, and she has no idea where it went. And things happen when she gets to the city from the desert. Things happen that she doesn't quite understand. But that kind of allowed me to put the air in, because it's like her understanding of the world is beautiful in a way that mine isn't, because she kind of has to explain it to herself and wonder in a way that, like, maybe we don't in a big city, and so that's where I put the air in for her.
Yeah. Well, you talk about that writing process, like character switching point of views, deciding that you're going to write sort of these alternate chapters. And I'm also thinking of my favorite chapter 13, Louisville. in which there's this repetition of the structure. Have a baby, young woman. And it's this direct address, but then, and I don't know if you want to read again soon. I love this part. I love this part so much. But part of what it does is it calls out that contradiction and that the devastation in infertility messaging that women in the U.S. really receive about, I have mine all mocked up. Okay, all right.
I found it.
As a good student of yours, I have studied this and mocked and taken notes.
I will read a little bit from this chapter. Have a baby, young woman. You can't have one on your own, the normal penis through vagina in an evening of lust way? Then come on down and shoot yourself with Clomid. Then walk around town with shooting pains in your groin while your ovaries spend 2 weeks blowing themselves up until they're the size of walnuts. In the shower, feel the water running over your ovaries. Fill your lady parts through your skin. When you sit on the roof of a building talking to your weed dealer, sense the outline of your ovaries through your now too tight jeans. Watch Kiva glance down to take in the new roundness of your stomach. It's pooched out like there's a baby in there, but guess what? A baby's never going to come. But tell Kiva nothing, young woman. Infertility is your secret, your cross to drag through the streets, all by yourself. 1,000 pounds of cedar, just like Christ's. Have a baby, young woman. Keep your infertility a state secret for just long enough that your new husband begins to doubt his own manhood. Watch him pour Jack and Coke into tumbler after bigger tumbler. Realize this isn't a great game plan. Ask him finally, one of those liquor-soaked nights, whether the two of you should see a specialist. Watch him in the clinic's plush leather seat. Watch his face regain its warmth as the tobacco-scented old doctor tells him that yes, his boys can swim. The problem's yours then. Watch your husband's face grow warm again at this turn of information. Have a baby, young woman. Go to a clinic, lie down at a table with a paper ground scratching against your sore, swollen breasts. Spread your legs and open yourself to every blast of air in the lab. Feel the needle penetrating the innermost of your insides as the tech takes 15 of your eggs, but don't flinch, young woman. Gotta be still. Listen to your children being sucked down the aspirator. Shoop, shoop. Hatch hopes for your gene pool, now lying as a film of jelly in a nearby plastic dish. Wonder if you'll ever meet any of these little wonders, whether any of these 15 will ever crawl across a carpet, play the clarinet, learn to drive, cure cancer. Here comes more and more aspirating, young woman, but you can distract yourself with thoughts of your weed dealer, who herself has lost 60 pounds since you met her. She's not trying to have a baby. Realize how this weight loss has actually been so bad for Kiva's face. Think about how her eyes now swim on her head in an uneasy way, a way that suggests death. As the technician finishes, as he withdraws the needle and then the tube, as the lubricating jelly drips down to pool between the skin of your buttocks and the butcher paper crinkling beneath you, think about how your new husband, whom you barely know, is in a nearby room. You're back in high school chemistry, but now you're the glass tube. You're the rinse. You're the pipette.
Thank you for sharing that. Will you talk a bit about the decision to have that be the direct address in the writing process, specifically at that point in the novel? It seems, as I know your work, a bit of disruption in a good way.
Yes, yes. And also, I think there's a certain power in the second person because, or actually, in this case, it's the direct address to Shannon. But it's like there's a power in making the reader the you for a second, in that you, the reader, then have to really identify with that character in a way that first and third person regular style doesn't do for you. And so I felt like this is kind of a point in the novel where maybe we're judging Shannon a little bit, you know. And I love what you said, Melissa, because we all have all the things in us, you know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, would you think you wouldn't kidnap a kid? But you might, you know. If you were her, you might. I might.
I definitely would.
You know.
Wait, we're being recorded. You're really talking about that desire.
Yeah.
that insatiable desire sometimes to take care of something else, whether it's a kid, it's my dogs, who sometimes I love more. Like, you know, it's this desire to care for.
Yes. And the ability to convince yourself that what you're doing is right. I think we all have that in us.
That's it.
Right?
Like, this is okay. And I think part of the power of this book is that line between Shannon's entitlement, American, you know, like the idea of American exceptionalism.
Yes.
Like there's real clear messaging about that too.
Yeah. There's a scene later, not to give away too much, but where they go to the embassy and you know, the horrifying thing I found in my research is that people do this too. They go to the embassy and they kind of falsify this, I think it's called an IR4 visa to get this child back. But the whole time it's told in that chapter a few different perspectives, and all of the people who witness this have convinced themselves that it's okay, that this kid is being hustled off to another country. And that exceptionalism is a big part of it. You know, these people are cut like so much slack by so many people, whereas the native Moroccans all around them are kind of made to be punished for that.
Yeah, that anything would be better than for Marty than this.
Yes. Yes.
So I also know that you've spent a lot of time in Morocco, and that I know you from your travels in the U.S. as well. And I'm wondering how that sort of migratory spirit fuels your work.
Gosh,
It's a big question. It's a big one. I know.
I feel like it has fueled my life in a lot of ways. And I guess, you know, what I would say is I feel really lucky. Sometimes I feel like I've wandered too much. And then sometimes I realize, like, when I wrote this book, it was kind of easy for me to talk about all these people in the desert because I kind of knew them, you know.
Yeah, you spent summers there with the girls.
Yes, and to be able to sort of, I didn't realize this until someone asked me this just like a couple of weeks ago, but I've entered the Sahara from almost every side you can enter it because I've been from Mauritania, Morocco, and another side. Anyway, so it's kind of like having known all of these different cultures that are kind of informing other cultures has been really lucky. And I think that that's true, like even in the United States, right? Because this is a big, vast place, and California is so different from like Missouri, which is different from DC, you know. And so,
and you lived in all of them,
like 15 states.
Right.
I lived in 15 different states. So to kind of understand people differently, and I think, you know, and I wonder if you feel this as someone from flyover country, right? That that kind of, you know, because I'm from Kentucky, and people have a lot of assumptions about Kentucky and people they're from, and to deeply understand oneself by being looked at through that lens and understanding what that lens is all about has informed a lot of my writing as well. Right? Do you feel that? As
I do. I wonder if the leaving part is so essential actually to our work.
Yeah.
Not that it is a place, I'm from Missouri, rural Missouri. It's not that it's a place I wanted to leave. It's that a place I chose to leave so I could see it differently. It was almost as if I left so I could stay.
Right.
And that distance creates a type of usefulness in how you see characters and how you look back, but also how you look forward, and how you I've been in DC more than a decade now. Am I a DC writer? I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Like, do I live here now? Is this the place I understand? But there's some kind of superpower in being able to, I think as a writer, regardless of where you are,
Right.
I'm curious about in your writing process, whether how much of this you wrote in the U.S., how much of this you wrote when you were in Morocco, how much, in transit, like
That's
what's,
a good question.
yeah, what space are you occupying when you have to look at Shannon and Surya and Marty, and understand these characters?
That's such a good question. And with my first book, the parts that were set in New York were actually really easy for me to write, and I think it's because I had to really consciously put distance between myself and Kentucky. With this book, I wrote a lot of the Louisville stuff while I was in Morocco and vice versa. I wrote a lot of the Morocco stuff here because I think, when you're living something, there's this whole different process that's going on. And then when you've digested it and can turn it into fiction, like that's a whole different world, right? It's like less factual, but somehow truer, when you have that distance to reflect on what it was. I remember there was one day in Morocco when I saw it was the most amazing thing. We're living in this town, this little beachside town, and there were carriages, horse-drawn carriages, and that's how you got to the supermarket and everything. And this guy had on this long black, it was kind of a suit. It was, I don't know where he was coming from, with a long jacket. And he just walked up to this moving carriage and like smoothly hopped on the back and just kept going, and then like just as smoothly hopped off. And that at the time meant nothing to me. When I got back to the United States, it turned into an entire chapter. He became a whole character, because I think you digest these images and they become really different once you get away from them, right?
Well, there's also that communal spirit of this is how you get a ride to where you're going, and that's just a rather than it being such a complicated process of calling my Uber and deciding and having watched you travel for the last 2 days trying to actually reach us was monumental, but it wasn't quite as easy as that. And I wonder if there's in some ways less complication when there's sort of survival at stake, right? Or that community spirit. I don't have any answers for that.
But I think that it's one thing that Surya, as a migrant, she wants so badly for there to be no complication, and it informs the end,
which we can't tell. Right, we're not. No. I disagree. I totally, I really do. I think there is such beauty in the forgiveness and understanding at the end of this book. And I think that of my own daughters and your daughters too, like this way of maybe being able to see motherhood as we did the best we could with the equipment we had at the moment in which we were doing it. And I hope that that's the understanding at the end is this, if it's not if it's not forgiveness, perhaps it's understanding, or this, Marty says at the end, I'm split like an injured tree, forever waiting for someone to graft me back together with wax. And she's really talking about not understanding who her mother is. But I don't know that that doesn't also relate to every intersectional identity that we all are carrying around with us also.
Yeah, and that's true of your book as well. And for those of you who don't know Melissa Young's writing, it's she's come out with a book now called The Hive, and it's the same, that notion of forgiveness and understanding, right? It's like, I don't even know, your plot is so wonderful. I don't know how
I'm
to
so
talk
glad you
about
were stuck on the tarmac for so long reading it. That's a great way to have to read it.
No, it was amazing. But I don't even know it's hard not to give too much away without. But it's about a family of women who are kind of forced into a decision about taking over the family business. And the ending, there is so. Because I was wondering if I'd be able to forgive some of the characters.
Right.
But in the end, you pulled that off.
Thank you.
marvelously.
I appreciate that. I'm still wrestling with it, but I think I agree with you. That's our job as a writer,
Yes.
right? Is how do we, at the end of the book, you know, if the novel is inviting our audience into this world we've created for this amount of time, how do we then at the end gently push them back out, right, into reality with this new maybe understanding we've tried so hard to create for them?
Yes. Yes.
That to me seems to be our challenge.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
So I also want to end. We're going to open it up to questions because I knew you have more questions and I have so many questions. But I want to talk about the question at the very beginning of the novel and how maybe it guides us through the entire plot. And it begins with this. And what, after all, to make of a choice? It's so, to me, cemented in the literary canon. There's so many authors that I can hear in that voice that we studied together in class. But in the end, that choice always, the impossibility of a choice with a consequence, to me, is what's so married so very well in. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about these choices that.
Sure. And there's always grief tied to it. You know, even the best choices we make just create such a ripple effect, and that often ends in grief. And I think for both of these characters, oh man, they have. What I try, and I did this really fun interview with my character for women's books, women's writers, and I interviewed Shannon, and one of the things she says to me in the interview, she's like, "You wrote me this way. I didn't have any choices. I didn't have any good choices, you know." And I think neither of these women do. So when I write and what to make of a choice, because I write that for both of them, really, they are just getting from point A to point B. Neither of them have that much freedom. You know, they're both incredibly constrained in different ways, very different ways, granted, but different ways. And so, yeah, choice is hell. You know?
I mean, it's easy to make good choices when you have good choices, and
yes.
Yeah.
Although it's easy to make bad choices when you have good choices. You know,
that's true too. What do you hope a reader most takes away from this?
Just that we all have the capacity to do heinous things, but we all have the capacity to love afterwards. I think, particularly with parenting, it's like to love is a verb. It's not a thing that just. And I think this is a myth, right? You suddenly you have this kid. However you came by this kid, you have this kid and you just love this kid. And I think the reality is completely different. It's like to love is a verb, and you have to practice it every day and figure out what that means.
Right.
You know.
And it changes. Yeah. I mean, as our kids get older, I'm learning more and more that love is to
not kill them.
Shut up.
Yes.
It seems to me as my kids move from teens to not teens, it's about more doing less. It's sitting on my hands, loving in a different way.
So hard.
It's really hard when you've been, as Shannon does, caring for their bodies in such an intimate way, and then suddenly you're supposed to just watch them run away. And figure out their own way. But let's not cry. Let's not do that. You have questions as well, I'm sure. And you can come up. Tara Campbell is first up.
Hello. So
Hi,
good to
Tara.
see you again.
You too.
So I joked a little bit about this when we were talking about balancing teaching and writing and all of that. But in a book this immersive, how do you manage between the culture of Ann Arbor and Kentucky and Morocco and parenting to add to that? How do you manage to immerse yourself in the book?
So, when I'm in a book, I'm in. Right now I'm not writing, but when I am writing a novel, I write every single day. I wake up at 5:30 in the morning because then I'll get at least an hour before anybody else wakes up, and I've been doing that for years. Some of the best advice I got, the first day of grad school, the director of the program said, write in the same place every day, at the same time. And we can't, most of us can't possibly do that, but to the extent I can, it just makes the creation part that much easier, right? Because it's like, I feel like the imagination is a muscle, and it's like if you play cello or violin, like that muscle memory disappears after a few days, and I feel like it's the same with the imagination. So I try to keep myself in it in a very habit-formed way.
Well, no one's behind me, so I'll ask a follow-on. Do you have a playlist? Like I cannot have any kind of noise going on, but most writers I'm finding do have music. But did you have a playlist while you were working on this?
Chinarwin. Have you heard of Chinarwin? Oh, they're amazing. They are so amazing. I wish I had my laptop out. They're a band from northern Mali. I bet Seitu knows Chinarwin. Oh, you don't? They're from northern Mali, and they're very politically kind of informed. I don't know Arabic that well, but I wish I did. And their music is kind of the music of the desert. So that was the third country I was trying to remember. Mali. I've been there through Mali. I've been to the Sahara through Mali as well. So I do, and I find, I don't know if you feel like this too, Melissa, but I feel like music with no words kind of keeps me on task in a way silence can't. Do you write with music, or?
I write with a noise machine that drowns it, and with what do you call,
Oh, wow.
I'm reaching another level of silence.
Yes. Yes.
And then at least 3 doors
Wow.
between us, and
Nice. Nice.
it's not always hospitable to a life with dogs and children and guitars, but there I am. But I think that I can understand not wanting the lyrics, right? Like those might infuse. And Tara, you write in silence also? Okay.
I should
Interesting.
try this.
I don't know. I think
Silence.
everybody is different. I think everybody, you got to figure it out. And I don't think there's one way. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So this comes actually from an interview that Melissa was giving, or in some kind of reading. Melissa was talking about the Hive and about how she had I think this, I got to have this right, that you wrote the whole thing and then you really wanted to make sure you had the right voices for each person. And so you rewrote all of each character in order, like each Jules chapter you did in Jules' voice, and then redid each other character. So I haven't read yet, but and you've talked about where you wrote what, and so I get that you were flip-flopping. But I am curious if you felt like you had to dive back in, like if you were able to retain those voices distinctly. I mean, I think there's a lot of distinction probably here that naturally occurred, and you had the places. But if you could just speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Yeah, and it was harder with my first book because the first book was written into different first-person voices. So these were 2 girls who one of them, they were both from the same town, but one of them was really well-read and had a library subscription, and the other spoke in a way that I don't even speak, but my grandmother does, because she's from way back Kentucky. And so I had to make a chart. No, my accent's not going to stop all night. Sorry, friend.
Welcome to the East Coast. It somehow thickens when you're here, I have to say.
But I made a chart, like when did she use weren't versus weren't versus, because they're different. I mean, it is a different diction with like these rules that I just had to wrap my mind around. With this book, it was more, oddly enough, it was more about the illiteracy, which was difficult, but it wasn't difficult on the level of language. Like I just had to remember, like, now she does not know how that works, right?
And you're talking about code switching as well,
Yes.
which we all do on a daily basis
Yes.
into a microphone in DC when we're from rural communities or urban communities that are southern as well. Like there's a
Yes.
way that we code switch in that.
Yes.
And I have to say, Jessica, I think my watching you. So one day in workshop, I'm going to tell a story on you. One day we're in workshop more than a decade ago. I don't know. I think I was nursing a baby. You had a baby in the room. This was normal for us. So we're trying to get through fiction workshop. And we asked something about, I guess it was St. Monkey at the time. I guess we were asking about your first novel, and you whipped out a manuscript. And I mean, It was this tall, and it had all of your notes on it, and all of your agent's notes, and all your editor's notes, and there were Post-its, and there was your writing. And I remember you saying, look, this is what I'm wrestling with, okay, folks, in this workshop, this is what writing really looks like. And all I can remember is thinking, oh, that's a book. Like, my naive MFA brain was, that's a book, and that's a book, and that's you wrestling through it. And so when I rewrote 5 different point of views in the Hive, it was like writing 5 different novels, which I don't recommend, but I wasn't as daunted because I knew the process was really messy to get it right.
And did you go through different stages of revision to get those voices more distinct?
Well, I had to. Once I got the plot structure, then you have to pull out each of the voices and you write. I mean, in switching point of views, I don't know how if this is true for you too. I have to often write a plot point, like the funeral scene, from 3 different point of views, and then I'm figuring out who has the access to tell it.
Right.
And then I'm literally just throwing away the other point of views because they're not the ones. So only one person gets to tell it. And so who needs to tell? Whose story is it in this moment, right? Is this Shannon's story, in this moment?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's very cool. I love the effect of what you've done.
Thank you. That's very kind. I don't know that there's, each book, and I'm curious the difference between writing Saint Monkey and writing Mother Country. Were they the same? I want to believe I've learned something between my first and my second book, and I'm not sure I have. I'm not sure that I'm not just starting over every time.
And I feel like too, part of the challenge is you want to do something completely different.
Ambitious, absolutely.
And that can be really, really hard. Like, I have made some decision that I don't quite understand, but I've made this decision to tell all my novels in diptych, meaning 2 different points of view, serially told. I've done it in 2 different voices. I've done it in this way, and now I'm struggling with the next novel, which I'm starting to revise, and like how I can make that a little bit more inventive this time. So it's interesting. It's like it's a moving target, right? Revision and learning. It's very much a thing that you adjust for the next book,
Well, that you learn for the next book. I think the idea is that if we've got 2 books out, we should know a few things.
Right. No.
It turns out
really.
that we're all just learning. Yes. Are there other questions from the audience? You're welcome to run on up to the microphone. Otherwise, I'm going to ask about the 3rd book.
Sure. So the 3rd book.
Come on up if you want. You can just.
Yeah.
We won't. You're welcome. You can even shout from there, and I'll just repeat it for you. Also, if anyone has questions. This is such a lovely night.
Hi.
I'm so glad
I loved the book, and one of the things I loved about it the most is that everyone in it was Black or from the really lowest level of society. And I guess what I wanted to ask about was the transformation of the child, because I noted that at one point you talked about how the people in the school didn't know enough to realize that this child could not be the child of that no one ever asked if she was
their kid,
adopted.
Their real kid.
And I thought it was so interesting, sort of the juxtaposition between the child who was in the street in her adopted culture, I guess, in Morocco. And then you mentioned the hair and the way the mom was dressing her in America.
Yeah.
And I guess I wondered about the mutability of Blackness.
Yeah.
Like how do you...
Yeah. Thank you, Penny. This is Penny Cotton. Awesome person. And there was one draft of the book where she had made a really concerted effort to make this child a Black American, like she was taking her to church and she was doing just all of the things, and I took it out ultimately because the book was too long, but also because I felt like the truth is that it is a very mutable identity. And when, as you yourself probably know, when you arrive here from another country to the rest of the world, you're just black, right? There is no other identity except here, black and white, and the other IPOC, I call it IPOC, right? And so I didn't want to make too much of it. There is a part where the kid has to think about her identity, and basically, and this came out of like a question that my editor asked me, actually. She said, how come this kid just goes to America and she never speaks Arabic to anybody, and she's just like, why isn't she running around saying, this is not my mom and this is not my dad? And I think, like, I wrote a chapter that was from the perspective of her brain, actually. And it was about, like, shedding that identity and becoming more mutable, and even, suppressing the Arabic language, which figures into the sad ending later. But, suppressing all of these things and finally being like, okay, I'm going to call that woman mom, and I'm going to call that woman dad, or man dad.
Yep. It's awesome. I felt like there were lots of, like, little hidden things that you did that I thought about more just because of being black and being, a black immigrant.
Yeah.
And I really, really appreciated that you thought so much about it that you sort of put them throughout the book in the character.
Thank you. I tried. And this goes back to your question about empathy, because I have no idea what it's like to totally shed an identity, or be forced to shed an identity and be forced to, like, take on this other one. But I figured it's still part of that whole thing about, like, we all have all things in us, like we all do. And I think one of the things that we all have in us is that ability, and sometimes that urge to be like, you know what, I just want to lay low and fly under the radar, and so I'll be American, thank you, So.
It's complicated. This motherhood, these identities, these paths are complicated. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for teaching me and us tonight so many things.
Thank you for having
You'll
me.
stick around to sign some
I
books
will.
now? Okay.
Thank you all for being
Thank you,
here.
everyone.
It's
Thank
nice
you
to
so
see
much.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. Another applause. It was just a great conversation. So as we've mentioned, we're going to have a signing line. We have copies of the book